So our first speaker is Larissa Tittl. Larissa's research focuses on human landscape interaction in Aegean prehistory, ancient Mediterranean reception, and the environmental humanities. Her paper is called From There to Here and Back Again, Evans's Great Goddess, Frazer's Dying King, and Mary Renault's Popular Fiction. Thanks, Larissa.
Right. Thank you, Caroline. And just make sure everyone can hear me and see the screen properly.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Mary Renault's The King Must Die, first published in 1958, reimagines the Greek myth of Theseus, hero and ruler of Athens. Renault's novel charts Theseus's journey from his birthplace in Troezen to his destined Athenian kingdom via Eleusis and Crete. This paper focuses on the connections between Renault's version of the Theseus myth and Frazer's Golden Bough, as well as the connections between The King Must Die and Sir Arthur Evans' reconstruction of Bronze Age Knossos. Evans himself was also influenced by Frazer in his interpretations, of course. Elements from both Frazer and Evans infiltrate, inform, and drive the plot of Renault's novel. Most notable are Frazer's dying or sacrificial king god, who is both a divine and an earthly lover or consort to a goddess, that goddess herself in various forms, the connection of these figures to agricultural fertility, and the so-called primitive rites associated with their worship. From Evans, we recognise the figure of the priest king and a great goddess. His priest king is both ruler and earthly son of that goddess. But more than just highlighting these influences upon Renault's work, this paper considers the status of all three texts, and the site of Knossos is treated here as a text, as a highly literary and imaginative set of works that have each become embedded within popular culture, affecting the ways in which ancient Greece and Bronze Age Crete have been and continue to be interpreted, imagined, and received. Each text constructs an overarching narrative through the use of myth, anthropological, historical, or archaeological data, bound by the author's overriding vision of the past. Although only The King Must Die is ostensibly fiction, criticism has been aimed at both the Golden Bough and Evans, accusing these works of having fictive elements, especially around Evans' reconstruction of Knossos. So here the idea of intertextuality may be useful, both for charting the connections in The King Must Die between this book and the earlier works, and for placing each of these texts within a specific cultural space where particular meanings are produced. According to the theory of intertextuality, the meanings of a text are located within the discursive traditions to which the text responds and within which it participates actively in the production of meanings. French theorist Christeva calls this a mosaic. So by examining the meanings produced by texts and how these meanings are further reproduced, we can then explore the ways in which these meanings matter. After outlining some of the traces of Frazer and Evans in Renault's novel, I will explore how all three texts treat the idea of female-centered cultures and why their visions of female rule and goddess worship are indeed problematic. This is all necessarily a broad stroke picture, given the limited time and the vast amount of material that could have been included. So we know where the story begins, in Diana's sacred grove at Nemi, where the priest king is killed each year. The story continues in Frazer with a section on Hippolytus, Theseus's son by the Amazon Hippolyta. Of him, Frazer states that in the handsome Hippolytus, cut off in his youthful prime, we have one of those mortal lovers of a goddess who appear so often in ancient religion, and of whom Adonis is the most familiar type. He goes on to describe early Artemis as a great goddess of fertility, who needed a consort to ensure that the crops were renewed. The sacrificed or murdered priest king is explored further when Frazer establishes the connection between divinity and rulership. This idea coalesces in Renault's Theseus, who sees himself as divinely ordained to rule. The King Must Die's opening sequences, recounting Theseus's youth in Troezen, are built upon the narrative traditions of the story in later Greek myth, alongside recognisably Frazerian elements, and in particular the pivotal moment in Theseus's boyhood, where he witnesses the sacrifice of the king horse, son of Poseidon. The sacrifice, to which the horse consents, which is another major theme in the novel, is recounted in bloody detail. The horse's life and death establishes the notion of a transitory kingship and the necessity of death for renewal. In this, it prefigures the death that Theseus will hand out in Eleusis to the queen's consort. Despite Troezen being ruled by sky god worshipping Hellenes, the goddess is still worshipped here. And as such, Theseus's grandfather consoles the stricken young boy over the king horse's death. "Don't grieve for the king horse," he says. "He has gone to the earth mother who made us all." But Theseus's innate sense of destiny compels him to leave Troezen and his mother, to seek out his father, King Aegeus of Athens, who had bound his mother to secrecy until and unless Theseus proved himself by lifting a heavy rock underneath which were hidden Aegeus's sword and sandals. Theseus takes an overland route past Eleusis, where he finds himself unwittingly caught up in an annual ritual familiar to us from that first description of Diana's grove at Nemi. This central motif of the recurring sacrifice of a priest king is the driving force behind Theseus's rise to power. It is the means through which he not only proves his worth, but it also provides him with the opportunity to dispense with female rule, goddess-centered worship, and the more barbaric elements that accompany these cultural phrases, and seek instead a clearly classical Athenian style of rule, one based on male rationality and a rejection of the past. He arrives at Eleusis on the day when the king must die and kills the king in unarmed combat. He had earlier realized that he had no choice in this matter, saying, "If I refuse, the people will tear me to pieces. I am the sower of their harvest." The killing of the divine king here, as in Frazer, is connected to agricultural fertility. The king who must die is also a scapegoat, echoing Frazer's description of this phenomena. Theseus says of the sacrificial king, "He is the scapegoat. Looking at him, the people see only the year's troubles, the crop that failed, the barren cows, the sickness. They want to kill their troubles with him and start again." Frazer, like Theseus, sees this practice as deplorable, claiming that the Athenians regularly maintained a number of degraded and useless beings at the public expense, and when any calamity, such as plague, drought, or famine, befell the city, they sacrificed two of these outcasts, the scapegoats. Despite the queen of Eleusis being called Persephone, this is not the Eleusis of Demeter and her mysteries. Following Frazer's evolutionary schema, this Eleusis represents an earlier strata, a matriarchal one that aligns queen and king with field and seed. Both the ritual killing of the king and the practice of sacred marriage, with Theseus's consummation to the queen that is celebrated by the people of Eleusis, both of these practices are untenable to Theseus. He manages to escape the fate of his precursor, rejecting the queen and her matriarchal order and setting off once again for Athens. So in Troezen and Eleusis, Theseus had been uneasy about and even contemptuous of the consequences of female rule and goddess-centered worship. Instead of a glorification of female power, which we might expect from Renault, we see societies that are somehow weakened, warped, or ineffective due to this female influence. Here is the cultural evolution that is embedded in Frazer's work: female rule, whether termed matriarchy or not, and goddess-centered worship is clearly a more primitive stage of development. This content continues in Theseus's Cretan adventure after he is dispatched with one more female with too much power during a brief sojourn in Athens. This female is, of course, a very sibilant Medea married to King Aegeus. Medea attempts to murder Theseus, knowing that he is Aegeus's true son. She is expelled, still defiant, after Theseus reveals his identity and exposes her ruse. So turning to the influence of Evans, Kristeva's mosaic metaphor might be useful to explore these influences on the Cretan episode. Renault moves from a largely Frazerian schema to one more influenced by Sir Arthur Evans and his Bronze Age Knossos. Evans, of course, was a product of late Victorian England and the intellectual culture that was by then infused with the idea of cultural evolution. Much of his interpretation reveals Fraser's influence. The most obvious elements that we also see in Renault's novel are Evans' priest-king and the great goddess. Evans thought that the priest-king was both the ruler of Knossos and the adopted son on earth of the Minoan goddess. Evans' Minoans are peace-loving, goddess-worshipping, and nature-centered flower lovers. Although not matriarchal strictly, women here are accorded a high social rank. His great goddess is a fertility goddess in the wider sense, who provides a vibrant fecundity to Crete. Unlike the goddesses in Frazer and their worshippers, the Minoan great goddess does not require sacrifice. Here, the king does not die. In this, Evans' positive vision of goddess worship diverges from Fraser's more negative one. However, in Renault's novel, these two competing visions provide the dramatic tension that lies at the core of this episode. While Renault's depictions of what she calls the House of the Axe are obviously drawn directly from Knossos, she visited the site and was enthralled by it, and had been exposed to the Ashmoleans collection during her time at Oxford. The spiritual core of her Knossos reflects ideas from Frazer and the Cambridge myth ritualists. Renault's Cretans have not yet evolved into the patriarchal stage. Renault is inspired by the idea of bull leaping, and although this is seen as a barbaric practice, it provides Theseus with a way to develop and demonstrate his skills as a leader and a champion for his people. Her Theseus describes his first glimpse of bull leaping. The leaper ran smoothly up to the sullen bull. He grasped the horns and swung up between them, going with the bull. Then he soared free. He turned in the air, a curve as lovely as a bent bow's, and on the broad back, his slim feet touched down together. Then they sprang up again. He seemed not to leap, but to hang above the bull, like a dragonfly over the reeds. While Theseus and his companions are captives, Evans' bull leapers are not servile, but are instead of noble mien. Renault also has female bull leapers, an idea taken from Evans, whose female acrobats are also surely of gentle birth. The female bull leapers in Evans in particular are female ministers of the goddess who have a foremost place in her service. Bull leaping in Evans is an element of goddess worship. However, Renault turns it into, despite its dangers, light entertainment for the Cretan court, where the bull leapers foster intrigue and romance among the high-born citizens. Still, Renault's description of the bull ring seems taken directly from the Knossos frescoes. All around sat the palace ladies. Friends greeted friends and kissed, and called for their seats to be moved together. Soon it was like a spreading tree in which a flock of bright birds has settled, cooing and twittering and preening. The prominence of goddess worship at Knossos is reflected in the shrine that Theseus describes. It is located centrally within the palace, with double axes on pillar mounts beside the door, and a massive statue of the goddess with a flounced skirt, bare breasts and serpents around her outstretched arms. The figure of Ariadne emerges from this shrine, wearing a foot-high diadem encrusted with a golden leopard. These descriptions are clearly drawn from the snake goddesses dug out of the temple repositories at Knossos. Ariadne is greeted by the men laying their fists on their breasts and the women touching their foreheads gestures we know from bronze votive figurines found in the sacred cave at Sacro. Renault's bull leapers live and train deep within the House of the Axe, also called the Labyrinth. The House of the Axe is described as a palace within whose bounds you could have set a town. It crowned the ridge and clung to its downward slopes, terrace after terrace, tier after tier of painted columns, deep glowing red, tapering in towards the base, and ringed at head and foot with that dark, brilliant blue the Cretans love. Over the highest roof edge, sharp cut against the deep blue Cretan sky, a mighty pair of horns reared toward heaven. As with Eleusis, Theseus rejects what he finds in the House of the Axe, including Ariadne, whom he had promised to take to Athens. She shows herself beholden to the old ways by participating in Dionysiac rites on Knossos. Theseus finds her covered in blood, her hands sticky with it, and holding something unmentionable, but we can maybe guess what she's holding. Theseus's destiny lies instead beyond the orgiastic excesses of these female-centered cultures, in Athens, where his rule will be both enlightened and patriarchal, and the sky god Zeus will be worshipped above all. So, where have we arrived with Renault's Crete and its House of the Axe, its goddess worship, and its post-matriarchal decadence that has not yet fully evolved into a shining patriarchy? This is not quite Evans' splendid Knossos, not quite Frazer's sinister grove sacred to Diana. Renault's Theseus story is a mosaic constructed from Frazerian themes, Evans' Knossos, and later Greek myth, along with her own worldview. Her attitude to women might seem a little surprising, given that she is both female and lesbian. Most female characters in The King Must Die are either at best ineffectual or misinformed, and at worst murderous and duplicitous. Their adherence to the old ways of goddess worship and barbaric rituals means that they hold Theseus back from his destiny and condemn their own societies to an earlier stage of cultural development that is unenlightened. We might even call them toxic matriarchies. But why should these meanings matter? Why should we be concerned about the meanings produced around this female rule and goddess worship at a time when cultural evolution and comparative mythology were in vogue? Perhaps one reason is because the binary and essentialist nature of the gender-based societies we visit in these works, whether matriarchal or patriarchal, whether positively or negatively interpreted, are used to refuse both nuance and radical change in how gender is now constructed and perceived. The end. Sorry, I meant to go to this screen, which this screen shows some industry reviews of Renault's work. And the interesting thing about these is, for a lot of people, The King Must Die is counted as historical fiction, which is a very interesting approach to her work, I think.
Thanks, Larissa.